You're listening to A Book with Legs, a podcast presented by Smead Capital Management. At Smead Capital Management, we advise investors who play the long game. You can learn more at smeadcap.com or by calling your financial advisor.
Welcome to A Book with Legs podcast. I'm Cole Smead, CEO and Portfolio Manager here at Smead Capital Management. At our firm, we are readers, and we believe in the power of books to help shape informed investors. In this podcast, we speak to great authors about their writings. The late, great Charlie Munger prescribed using multiple mental models and analysis. We analyze their work through the lens of business, markets, and people. Very specially, co-hosting this episode with me is our founder, chairman, and chief investment officer, or as I like to call him, Dad, Bill Smead. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
So this is an exciting day. We are sitting here on a stage, which is very not normal. We don't have any mics, pivoting in our face. We're here. We haven't mentioned the other people that are with us, sitting here in front of us three gentlemen. I'm very proud to be sitting here with the investors of Smead Capital Management, and proud to have them join us live from this 2026 Smead Investor Oasis. Thank you for all being here, and great round of applause, please. One other thing, let's see, I'm trying to make sure I get through all my notes here. Yep, we're good. All right, so in this episode, we'll discuss the role of technology, competition, monopolies, and regulation in our society. Joining us for a live podcast, the Smead Investor Oasis, is Tim Wu to discuss his recently published book, The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threatened Our Future. Again, one more round of applause for Tim Wu being here today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to give you a little background on Tim, just to make sure you're familiar with him. He's a professor at Columbia Law School. He's known for developing the term net neutrality, and which came about, during the 2010s. He has also published 4 other books. He previously worked in the Obama White House, and he's a veteran of Silicon Valley. He was a law clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court. He graduated from McGill University, another Canadian connection. And also Harvard Law School. He has written for many publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, and Forbes magazine. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So we always ask authors this. You've written on these subjects. You obviously have done a lot of work in this area. What inspired you to write this? And you can't just tell us that the publisher came with a check and said to do it.
No, it didn't happen that way. I wrote this book following on some of my other books to try to get at the kind of fundamentals of prosperity and wealth creation and how they manifest in modern times. I mean, I've been studying technology and tech platforms and the evolution of the tech industries over the 20th century. And what I've constantly been interested in is this question of what here is truly new and what here is old and has always been with us. And what can we understand from the lens of history and economics? And in this book, it's kind of the third in the series, I'm particularly focused on the platform. Now, platform is a concept I think we throw around, we talk about all the time, this big platform, that successful platform. But we often use it without really getting deep into the meaning of the word platform, the concept of the platform, and its effect on competition, freedom, and markets. So that's kind of what I was trying to dig into with this book.
Sure. You open the book with an Apple commercial that you talk about. And I'm going to use this as kind of like a storytelling opening, if you will. I'm going to use a quote out of your book. We'll use some quotes during our conversation today. You say, quote, "But as Freud once said about jokes, advertisements often reveal uncomfortable truths," end quote. Explain what was important about this advertisement and what you see as uncomfortable.
Sure. So Apple ran this advertisement pretty briefly, and it featured this giant kind of press. And this press was coming down on an array of musical instruments and paints and other sort of creative sort of tools, and it slowly crushed them one by one until what was left at the end of the ad was this very thin iPad, and it said Apple's thinnest product ever. And I guess what was symbolized by that was this idea that maybe humanity is just not going to play an important role in our own future. A sense that we're all kind of replaceable, even the most skilled and talented and cultured among us. And Apple was just sort of saying it, like kind of as a joke, but kind of not as a joke. And I guess part of I wrote this book for a lot of reasons. But one of them is I like many people who are thinking about technology, kind of want to know what our role is going to be, humanity. And are we going to, be the masters of our own destiny, or are we going to be replaced in some way?
Yeah,
Sure.
you get into a philosophical question, which we agree very much is being begged on by the public, which you pose as whether technology is, quote, some kind of omnibenevolent godhead that will act by itself to solve humanity's problems, unquote. Flush that, explain it a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things, I'm a close observer in Silicon Valley. I spent some of my career there. And one of the things that has interested me is a rise of almost a religious kind of belief in Silicon Valley, particularly centered around AI, on this sort of deliverance power of technology. And it comes with a theory that, technology can never sort of go wrong. That there's always kind of going in this positive direction. And, I think that's often true. I think our lives are incredibly benefited by technology, modern medicine, conveniences, cars, whatever. But technology can go in bad directions too. I mean, I don't think fentanyl was the greatest invention. I think people struggle with that.
Sure.
Take another example I talk about in the book. The cotton gin in the 19th century fortified plantation slavery and kind of reinforced the economics of slavery. So we had to have this crazy civil war, over it instead of slavery ending naturally. So, technology is not, I don't think, Godhead. I think it goes in different, and I think we have, we can choose, and we have to play a role in trying to decide what kind of future we want to have. And, often that's a very prosperous direction. But I think as we have these technologies that are as powerful as we are, we need to make sure they're sort of doing what we want for humanity.
Yeah. It also reminds me of like one of our favorite characters from Napoleon Dynamite, right? Kip.
Kip.
Right?
I love technology, but I love LaFonda more.
I did not expect a Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, no, you get everything here. You get everything. These technology platforms are made for matching. Before eBay and Amazon, buyers and sellers went unmatched, correct?
Yes, that's true. I think swinging back to the platform and the theme of the platform, the genius of every platform, and this book goes back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the Chinese market states, is putting people together. I mean, that's the fundamental thing that a platform has always done. And in some ways, I'm very interested in history, and every successful, prosperous civilization at its core has something we would now call a platform.
Sure.
I was with my kids in Rome this fall. I was walking around. You walk around the Forum near the Colosseum, and there it all is. All the markets, the courts, the places gave people. They all have these central spaces. And I guess the point which I want to emphasize is sometimes when you study economics in college or whatever, you have this idea that transactions just happen. Now, I think you guys know better than this, but everything has to happen somewhere. There has to be a market, there has to be a place, and the shape of those transactional spaces, in my view, do a lot to determine what kind of civilization we live in. More open, more prosperous kind of civilization, or something a little more closed, controlled, and ultimately feudal.
The tulips were in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's true.
So information trust, you talk a lot about the idea of trust is important. We don't trade with, as a company, our investors wouldn't want us trading with brokers that we don't trust.
Yes.
Right? Trust is implicit in any marketplace.
Yeah.
The town square, you go out and you sell your goods, you're going to give credit to someone. Trust is key in that element. I think of the investment business as a disclosure-based business, right? You can have a conflict, but if you disclose it, it's known. Same with the law, the world of the legal realm, as I'm sure you know. Is there any accountability to track the trust, or is there not, because it would require disclosure? In other words, as we look at these companies and they say, hey, we're going to do this new, why? Why? What is that going to cause? Things of that nature. Do you think that there is pure disclosure that just is missing?
This is a good point. The successful platforms through all of history, whether it's the stock market, whether it's the ancient Roman Forum, or the Greek Agora, they had standardized weights and measures. It was one of the few, and they kicked out the people who were fraudsters. So successful trading platforms throughout history have always done a lot by increasing the level of trust. And when you think about securities laws in the 30s, I know not everyone loves them, but the main thing they did is they forced companies to say a lot more about what they were doing.
Yep.
And the question is, as we realize today that our main platforms are, are basically the tech platforms, as we move away from traditional platforms, and particularly when you think about AI-mediated transactions, where is the full disclosure of what's going on? I mean, I don't know if you guys use LLMs or not a lot, but when you go out and say, find me these things, how do you know what they're not looking at? It's very hard to know really what's going on, and sometimes the companies themselves say they don't really know.
Sure.
So I think as we go forward, you can survive for a while on low trust systems. They go, in the 20s, the stock market was kind of a low trust system, but then, lo and behold, it turned out people were lying about stuff, and then there was a huge crash. So we can coast for a while. But one of the things I think, if we want our current tech platforms, and particularly if we want AI transactions to work better, we need to make sure that they are high trust systems. And right now, I don't think we have that. Right now, it's basically, trust Claude, because he knows what's good for you.
People are still lying, by the way.
It gets back to the idea of like technology. It gets back.
Impossible.
No. So
it gets back to the whole idea of the Godhead, right? The Godhead, it's computing at a higher level than you and me, Tim, and therefore it probably knows better than what we do, as though it's like it's like the eternal being, it's the unmovable mover, et cetera. You talk about how these platforms are enabling platforms. Mm-hmm. Explain that to our audience.
Yeah, sure. I just want to pick up on your Godhead comment now for a second, because the amount of CapEx going into AI right now everyone knows here is massive. It's like 400 billion last year or something like that. The weird part about those investments is when you get deep into them and you listen carefully, there is a lot of what I think cannot be described differently than as religious faith in it.
We agree.
Yeah, that this thing is going to come. There's going to be this thing. I mean, some of this stuff, I was listening to one of the chief scientists, and he was talking about artificial general intelligence and what's, and it started like we're going to do that, and then it started going into, well, in 10 years we're going to cure all these diseases, and then we're going to prolong life. And he said then the final step is we need to go out into the galaxy and colonize the rest of it. And I was like, wow, I mean, we're pretty far from that when ChatGPT is, give me advice on my relationship.
LeCun has said that there needs to be a world model where they pour all the information into one place to be the best this can be. But everyone is spending the money to do their own large language model.
Yes.
And we were at the COSM conference, and we were having dinner after the conference with George Gilder. I said, George, the people built the Tower of Babel up to the sky because they wanted to be like God. And don't you get the sense that the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs, and these people want to be God, right? So they're effectively, but God looked down and he said, gosh, if these people get together, there's no end to how much sin they could do. So he jumbled their languages. So LeCun says that if they are each making their own language model, they're volunteering to do what God did by jumble. Because if your large language model is different than the other guys, so LeCun says that's a bad idea. So I got a kick out of that. So George Gilder says, you're right. Can I steal that? And that's the best thing that happened to me.
That was a shameless George Gilder plug, by the way.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. Maybe I'll get off religion. But I just want to say that I feel like, if I can get back to enabling platforms in a minute, we should be hedging our bets a little bit, because there's a definite cult-like thing at the core of it.
There's a cult around Elon Musk? I didn't know that.
No, I don't even mean Elon. I mean at the core of what people think artificial and general intelligence will achieve. And it could be true. Like, I don't want to say no. I just think when something sounds like really fantastic, then I think maybe it's time to hedge. I'm not.
Sure.
I am a private investor, but I'm not professional like you guys. But you asked me about enabling platforms.
Yeah. So just can you explain the idea of enabling platforms?
So I said before, I think platforms are at the core of any successful civilization and generation of wealth. And I think the big change over the last century have been platforms that enable sellers and sometimes buyers to do things they might not otherwise do. Now, we're totally used to these. This is basically whatever every tech platform looks like. For example, if you think about the basic idea of an operating system or like the Android or the Apple iOS. They allow companies to be on there and sell in a way they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So enabling platforms are, maybe the most important innovation of the last, 50 years or so. That's what that is at the core kind of the mobile platform, of the web itself. Just take the web and the internet as the most obvious example of enabling platform. It means a seller, as opposed to reaching people in their vicinity, can reach millions of people and offer them different kinds of services. So that's what enabling is.
Yeah. So you talk about the town square as future-proof.
I love this idea, by the way.
Yes.
How do tech platforms need to use this same paradigm?
Yes. So I think, not all platforms are created equal. And some platforms are better able to evolve, stay relevant or stay useful through changing technologies. And believe it or not, like Main Street or the city square are good examples of, frankly, fairly future-proof platforms, in the sense that you can have a Main Street full of stores, and that Main Street, 150 years ago might have been selling, cowboy boots, horse and tackle, like things like that.
Like in Old Town Scottsdale here.
Yeah. Maybe they still sell it here, I don't know. And then, then it can evolve to selling typewriters and so forth. And then, now these days, maybe you're doing iPhone repair and things like that. In other words, the platforms, Main Street stays the same. The uses of it change.
Sure. Yeah.
And tech platforms have not always been able to do this.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example if you don't mind.
Okay.
So if anyone went to France in the late 80s or early 90s, they might have been surprised to find that, a little bit like in a Monty Python skit, the French got there first. In other words, they already had an early version of the internet that they invented themselves. It was called Minitel. And the French Communications Authority distributed little terminals all over France. And you could shop. They had an early version of Amazon. They had an early version of eBay. They had everything like in the 80s and 90s. The problem is they built it kind of a French way, just to be optimized for the applications of that day.
Sure.
Right? So it was all text-based, whatever, and it was incapable of evolving. And so that's what I mean about future-proof, not future-proof platforms. The internet is remarkably future-proof, I will say. I mean, we'll see, but the basic, I don't want to get too technical, but the basic underlying TCP IP protocol was invented in the early 70s. And back then, if you ever, maybe, did anyone here use I know we're on a podcast, so shouldn't call the audience, but in the 80s, 90s, it just supported these crappy text-like games and weird stuff like that. And then suddenly got graphics. Then it started hosting TV and, with Netflix and things like that. Now it's like AIs on top of all. So it has survived all this through stuff that was built in the 70s. So I guess my lesson for that is that civilizations need to do a really good job in the platform they design, so they don't have to change out the entire platform every whatever years.
Well, now Apple spies on me. That's the thing I hate the most.
Well, and your Samsung TV.
Is I'll just be like walking around and they're listening to whatever conversations I have, and then they throw me some kind of a advertisement from just spying on me. It makes me really happy.
Hi, I'm Cole Smead, CEO and Portfolio Manager here at Smead Capital Management and host of this podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd like to invite you to check out smeadcap.com. At our firm, we are stock market investors. We advise investors who play the long game with a discipline that has proven success over long periods of time. Learn more about our funds at smeadcap.com. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investing involves risks, including loss of principal. Please refer to the prospectus for important information about the investment company, including objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Read and consider it carefully before investing. Smead Funds distributed by Smead Funds Distributors, LLC, not affiliated.
So IBM sought to stifle competition at a prior time.
Yes.
Okay, and you kind of use them, as they used to be called. I'm like way too young to know this, but they used to be called Big Blue.
Oh yeah.
Right? That's what IBM used to be called in the stock market. Big Blue. They sought to stifle competition. Teach us how this, how they did that and what happened in 1969 that kind of forever shifted the compute world.
Yeah, there was this moment in the late 60s, early 70s that really set the stage, I would say, for the incredible software and basically tech industry in the United States. If you went to the tech industry in the 60s, it was basically about IBM and a few other companies. And they controlled every layer of computing, software, hardware, you name it. They were sort of like the counterpart to AT&T and its monopoly over everything. In fact, I would say, just to put these, maybe we'll get to AT&T.
Yeah, we'll go there next. Yeah.
So in that period, it was very hard for outside software companies to do anything because everything came with IBM. IBM designed your software. They occupied all these markets. The Justice Department had decided that IBM was a monopoly and had decided that they wanted to break up IBM into various parts. So they brought a lawsuit, and the thing that IBM did to try to settle the lawsuit that I think made such a difference is IBM agreed for the first time to open the software markets, to allow software to be sold and allow other software to work with it.
Sure.
And it didn't work for, whatever, but who was the biggest beneficiary of that decision?
Gates.
Bill Gates. Also, I would say Oracle, and Larry Ellison, Sun Microsystems, all these companies that launched in the 70s launched because of the opening of this software.
What we know as SaaS today wouldn't be there without it.
Yeah, I don't know if, eventually things would have developed, but, IBM was a little bit like this French Minitel. Yeah. It was designed for a certain time and place, the 60s. It wasn't very evolutionary, and maybe that's why IBM is not the biggest player anymore, although they still manufacture mainframes.
Mav McNeely wouldn't be playing in the golf tournament this week.
Yeah.
So talk about the AT&T One system, a little background. When I was in college, because it was a regulated monopoly, if you called your parents after 10 o'clock on Sunday night, it was 10 cents a minute. So that was my once every 2 weeks, hi Mom, hi Dad, I'm alive.
I feel like, I've pretty young kids, and they have no idea of this idea of long distance versus local. I don't know if, maybe other people here don't either. That was once such a thing, as you say. The AT&T story is similar in some ways to IBM. In the 60s and 70s, American tech was basically two companies, right? It was basically two large monopolies who controlled every part of everything. Mm-hmm. And, I think part of the book about platforms is, in my theory, is that competition better, open markets are better. And the most important thing I think we did for the US, not the only thing, but one of the most important things for tech at least, was breaking up and opening up these areas so a lot of other people could come in.
Yeah.
And you see this after the AT&T breakup. You see companies like a very early version of AOL, which was run by some weird crackpot people, but whatever, in the early days. They got better later. Yeah. But they started, all these companies started because there was this opportunity, this openness.
And they sued Microsoft.
That was
right?
the 90s.
And I've been told by many people that know him that Bill Gates has the best photographic memory of any person they've ever met in their entire life, and you have no idea how many times he answered a question. I don't remember that.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little anecdote.
So it was a profitable answer for him, though, to call a spade a spade.
If you have time for it, I have an anecdote. I once kind of subtly cornered Bill Gates at a cocktail party at his house, and he was open to it, and we talked about it. And it was very interesting talking to him about that case and the effect on him and also the markets. Because he said to me, I'd never lost anything before. He said, this was the first time I'd ever lost when he lost that case. And he said, so I quit earlier and I got into philanthropy, maybe that's good. But he admitted it did sort of set him back and it opened things up. And what it did was create this window at that time. It kind of removed some of Microsoft's influence over the early internet and let all these little, cute little companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, all those guys get started.
Yeah.
Back when they were in their more beneficent, cute little phase, they were little toddlers.
The adorable part.
But there was pretty clear, I don't think Microsoft would have ever let Google get going had it not been under lock and key.
But this time, they've let these monopolists pay big money to sit on the dais at the inauguration with the President of the United States, which, in my opinion, was one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life in business. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I don't know if I want to comment on politics, but I wouldn't say the optics were ideal. How's that?
Yeah. You want to...
I'll say a little bit more. I don't think we should have a government that feels like it's pay for play. Let me say that.
We have that going on?
Wait, that's happening? Is there a grift?
Particularly not when it's like other countries.
Okay.
And so I'll just.
You must live in a different America than I do.
Yeah.
How did the common carrier rules that Nixon administration required cause competition?
You know, we're talking about
AT&T, yeah.
Now we're talking about AT&T, yes. So one of the things that the Nixon administration did.
A Republican, by the way, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Regulation.
That's true. I think today Nixon would probably be considered on the far left or something. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. No, that's joking. Nixon is uncredited.
He meddled like.
Nixon administration is deeply undercredited for its work in tech and telecom.
Okay.
Because one of the things that Nixon's people realized is like if AT&T continues to just be everything in tech, if we have this one company that decides everything and they think they know what the future is, that's not going to work. There's other little guys starting. There was this little company called Microwave Communications, Inc., MCI. And they had this weird idea, maybe we'll do long distance by microwave towers. All right, so it was a new idea. AT&T was like, that's a terrible idea, it'll never work. You can't connect with us.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of like a threat to us. So AT&T at that period was kind of this sort of like, this paranoid
monolith.
Monolith is like, that's not a good idea. It's like, our ideas are the best. And, we basically think what the people need is phones with different colors, maybe, and like, long distance, 10 cents out on Sundays. So, they had a very limited, gradual sense. I mean, tech was just so different when you read the histories of that period. And Nixon administration, to its credit, realized there was a bunch of companies that were starting the very early ancestors of internet services. So their idea was, does anyone remember this company, CompuServe?
Yeah.
Companies like that.
Yeah.
So their idea is you would use AT&T's line to dial up into a system.
It made a funny
And
sound.
then you'd be online.
14K.
Right? Yeah. Oh no, this was like 300 baud. This was way. That's 90s stuff. This is 70s.
You're a kid.
This is very early stuff. But people would log in to do like data processing. Some of it was commercial, some of it was consumer.
Yep.
And so they do this, and Nixon administration realized AT&T is just going to kill these guys, or it's going to co-opt them or make them. They don't want anyone to make money on their platform. It's like if it's not AT&T, we don't like it. In fact, they had this. They had very strong rules of what you could hook up. They didn't believe in answering machines, AT&T. They were like, answering machines are. They actually invented answering machines in the 30s. And they're like, this is a terrible idea. I'm not kidding. I read the internal memo from AT&T. It's a terrible idea because we have done internal surveys, and if people can record their phone,
Make less calls.
they will make less. They will not talk about things. Because we've done internal surveys. I guess by listening in on people. I don't know. We've done this with we've done these surveys, and if you can record conversations, no one will use the telephone, because first of all, maybe people will make contracts over the telephone, and someone will try and enforce them. But we believe that's like 20% of phone calls are salacious, scandalous, sexual, something like that. So no one will do it because they think, so that was there.
Sure.
So what they did is they protected, sorry, I realize I'm going on here, but
We do the same thing.
Yeah, they decided to protect the online companies, the Nixon administration, that were trying to get started on AT&T's network. And those companies, they were the early ancestors of the whole internet industry. So that was a big, important move by the Nixon administration.
You quote Tim Berners-Lee quite a few times in your book.
Yeah.
If you guys don't know who Tim Berners-Lee is, he created like what we know as Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, which is the internet's protocol that we use for going to web pages. I'm going to use this quote from your book. Quote, "The goal of the web is to serve humanity. We build it now so that those who use it later will be able to create things that we cannot ourselves manage." End quote. Is this where like the middle-aged boomers and young Gen Xers started in this great experiment? Like the internet's here to serve us? Or is that anywhere near where we're at today?
It's very interesting. So one of the reasons I wrote this book and what I was interested in was the optimism of the 90s and early thousands, and almost the, I guess, somewhat partially related, but also just this, I guess, in retrospect, quite naive belief that, in fact, I was collecting the things that the internet was going to do in the 90s.
Okay.
Number one, it was going to spread democracy around the entire world. So every country would be a democracy.
Okay.
Two, it would elevate public discourse. So we'd talk about civilized matters. Three, it would make every person rich. it did a little bit of that, depending who you are. 4, it would give every person with talent like a sustainable way of making money for the rest of their lives, with any kind of talent. That was the idea.
Okay.
I think it's safe to say the internet has changed a lot, but whether it is delivered on these promises, it doesn't seem to me the whole world has turned democratic. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Explain where Amazon started in selling books in the late 1990s. I literally had a guy in my office was one of the original seed investors of the Seattle people. He comes to Seattle, raises his money in Seattle. Where they're now with businesses selling on their platform. Talk about how this evolved and how it changed the revenue for Amazon versus the small businesses they dealt with.
Yeah, you talk about the revenue mix where, what their take rate was at the beginning versus what their take rate is now.
Yeah, I think the story of Amazon is a very interesting story when it comes to the distributional versus accumulation of wealth through the internet platform. So internet, Amazon started as a bookstore, idea was a big warehouse. Then it realized there was a lot more money to be made as a marketplace or as a platform. But what that means, giving a place for sellers to sell to buyers. And they expanded different things and made 2 pretty important innovations. One is they nailed fulfillment, which eBay had never done. eBay was still having people duct taping boxes and mailing them out. That didn't scale very well.
Yep.
And they also added a very good search function. We'll talk a bit about how that got a little corrupted later. But they added a great search function and started making a lot of money. And in the early days, and I guess I'm here about 2010, maybe 2012, the margins were low that they charged to sellers. So, less than 20%. So it's a clear advantage over brick and mortar. So what changes is when Amazon managed to lock up both sides of the platform, they shrug off Walmart, the eBay is in the rearview mirror. Then they start to raise the prices and fees on everything, which is good for Amazon, and you've obviously seen a lot of appreciation in Amazon stock, but kind of bad for the idea that the internet or Amazon is going to enrich a lot of sellers. And I think by the time you get to the 2020s, they have turned up the fees, so it's basically like brick and mortar, I think not much different. And in particular, the advertising model becomes a mainstay. And I think this is something to watch in the Amazon story, is you search something on Amazon, you get sort of sponsored links, you don't always know what you're getting. Those sponsored links have become the biggest single cash cow in tech, and I include the iPhone, Amazon Web Services, because in 2020, they grew 10, 20. In 2024, they were about $56 billion on almost no cost. Was that just that one advertising product?
It's called advertising, though, but it's really just placement.
Yes, it's placement, sponsored link. So they have the sellers bidding against each other, bidding down their own margins, right, to try to get in the preferred placement. $70 billion on almost zero costs. It's I guess in some ways I admire it as in a business perspective.
So I can't resist asking that, and it's not in the script.
Yeah.
Albertsons and Kroger were going to merge, and the Justice Department, who has been DOA, DOA says that would be monopolistic when those companies are tiny compared to Costco, Walmart, and Amazon. It's like, is there anybody with a brain in that world? Is there anybody in Washington, D.C. that actually understands what is going on?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question directly, but I think it's pretty important. I think it's pretty important that, when I worked in federal government, which I did, I thought it was a huge mistake to, go around, say, finding 2 hairdressers in Washington State who are fixing prices or something. Look, that's not great for the people wanting to get a haircut, but we're still just talking about $10. What about the billions and billions? And I think the priorities should be on the big money and the big structure. And just with AT&T and IBM, and I guess one of the theses of the book is I think we're moving or have moved to an overly monopolized state in the tech world where there's not enough opportunity for others. So that's kind of what I'm getting at.
So you talk about scaling, and I love this because it got me my brain was, the hamster started running really quick, as I like to say. You talk about scaling almost like there's a Soviet air to it, if that makes sense. And because I say that, because you use the quote, you point out that it's misattributed to Stalin, quote, quantity has a quality of its own.
Yes.
End quote. You then connect this.
Quantity has a quality.
Yeah. Quantity has a quality of its own.
Yeah.
You then connect this with social media. You explain that, quote, many users of social media were and are like tenants who spend hundreds of hours renovating their landlord's home. End quote. I love that. Okay, so here's my question. Is this just like Stockholm syndrome? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think people join social media because they want to see their friends and
be a degenerate
and like put out their thoughts to the world, and didn't fully realize. Let's take the case of Facebook, which is mostly friends and family.
Sure.
Didn't realize that they were sort of building another business model and giving their information to it. And I mean, early Facebook, I was like, oh yeah, I'll tell them everything and tell them everything I'm doing and everyone I know, and that'll be fine. And I kind of wonder, like, what was I thinking? But yeah. But I want to see my friends.
I had 850 friends in 2015. I was contemplating hiring an employee to wish people happy birthday every day, and I shut the thing down. And the reason I did, because I thought God is the only entity that should be looking into 850 lives at once.
Yeah.
Let's see, where am I?
Go to the second.
What about the intelligence agencies?
You talk about the movie business being the end for other businesses like Sony, who stagnated for years after that. We have Netflix as a potential suitor to Warner Brothers Discovery going on now. Amazon has MGM. Are these production studios a sign of what's to come for these businesses?
One of the things that's interesting, I write about this in my book, there was a time when if a big conglomerate of companies started buying sports franchises, you knew they're on their way down, or TV rights or getting entertainment.
Sure.
Like you think about Seagram's, another Montreal example. Remember Sony, this might be before people's time, they're like, oh, we want to get the movie business. So they bought Columbia Pictures, and then they made Hot Tub, #2, and they made these terrible movies, everything
Hot Tub
trash.
Time Machine.
Hot Tub Time Machine, the sequel.
Classic.
They made a sequel. I mean, the first one was okay. The sequel. Sequel. I actually watched part of it for writing this book.
That's not in the book, by the way, just so you guys know.
It is in the book.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Hot Tub Time Machine is in the book.
Oh, I forgot about that part then.
Yeah. No, so that used to be a clear sign that like, a business was in decline, or that something had gone wrong. The other person who really kind of pulled it off was Turner. He bought the Atlanta Braves, but he was a media guy. So.
Yeah, he was.
I'm reading that book right now.
So but when Amazon, and Apple and started buying media and investing in sports rights, nobody thought it was crazy, and I still don't think it's crazy. And I think it says something different about the business. It would have, as I said, be really weird if you imagine U.S. Steel, giant company of the 20th century, starting making movies and thinking that was a good idea. But it says something about the platform business model, which in my mind is, I think I say in the book somewhere, it's more of a kind of a herding business.
Yeah.
In other words, the whole idea is trying to encourage and sustain a loyalty which ideally verges on dependence on as large a population as possible.
Sure.
Like that is the model. And it really doesn't matter what you do.
Run as many things across it as you possibly can.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
And this gets to our next question, because you're touching at something, and it's like, okay, we have an aging population, so this is not a crazy idea you're throwing out there. How important is human laziness in the tech view of the future? You say we are comfort-seeking missiles.
Yes.
I love that line. That's great.
Yeah.
You describe it as a stoner that has couch lock.
Yeah.
And the munchies.
I mean, this is fire here. Will convenience become boring to us, I think, is the question.
I think, among the many forces in the universe that rule our civilization, Freud had the theory that interest in sex and death were our primarily motives. But at least from my perspective, a lot of my people I know, like, convenience has got to be number one. I think the most powerful force, and maybe among the most powerful forces today, is the easier way of doing almost everything. And I don't mean that to be disparaging. I mean, when you think about some inventions like the laundry machine, I mean, that was in some ways a labor-saving technology. But I do think that the battle particularly in tech, but maybe in a lot of industries, the winner is so often that which is even a little bit more convenient. You can even ask yourself when you think about it, it depends on who you are, but I know a lot of people who just like going to buy something off Amazon just feels like a Herculean effort. It's like this, I got to enter in my own credit card and forget it. You know what I mean? Or, like that, even these sort of tiny little frictions.
Yeah.
So, and I think that the tech platform is quite smart about that and understand it. And the idea, which is not fully complete, but has gone quite far, is to create a complete cocoon around you of all the conveniences you might need, so you never kind of need to leave your proverbial couch. And
I was going to say, very Wall-E-esque.
Yeah, and I think that's something of the business model of our time.
You mentioned the influencers. I'm hoping to get paired with Travis Kelce in the Pro-Am so that I can convince him to have 3 kids, because there's 4 million women in the United States that are going to want to have a kid the moment that woman has a child.
That's a theory, by the way.
That's one of my theories. That's the number one thing to help the home builders. Okay. I'm dead serious. I'm not. That's not a joke. I believe that.
I don't want to get lost on Taylor Swift.
Okay.
Am I allowed to say no comment?
No.
We hope you're enjoying the podcast. We work hard putting together this show, but we work even harder for our investors at Smead Capital Management. At Smead, we believe in disciplined investing, which is why the Smead funds have a proven track record of long-term outperformance. If you're an investor who plays the long game and want to invest in wonderful companies to build wealth, we invite you to visit smeadcap.com. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investing involves risks, including loss of principal. Please refer to the prospectus for important information about the investment company, including objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Read and consider it carefully before investing. Smead Funds distributed by Smead Funds Distributors, LLC, not affiliated.
Teach us about the perceptron and where the ideas of AI really began.
Oh yeah, I feel like even though it's all around us, we talk about it all the time, the early history of AI is a little bit lost to us. There was a long period where AI, what we now understand as the dominant AI technologies, were really the domain of a couple pretty wacky academics who had the idea, which people thought was nuts, of trying to build an electric model of the human brain. That's the way they just said it. They're like, we're just trying to recreate a brain, and we're going to have pathways and neural networks and all this stuff. And they had some moderate success. Or Perceptron is related to that, but really went nowhere from the 60s until the 2010s. It just was on the side. And when you think about it, it is kind of a weird idea. And something like, is that what succeeded? It did. The AI that we see everyone's used was based on the idea of creating an electronic version of the human brain and just letting it go and seeing what happens. And that ended up, as wacky as it seems, being the dominant AI technology of our time.
Yeah. The PC revolution made humans more productive. We were at COSM Technology Conference here in November in Scottsdale, where Ari Emanuel gave a more pessimistic view of the future for humans with AI. Is Orwell right this time, or will humans flourish with technology like they have in the past?
I honestly think it can go both. It could go both ways, and
okay.
I think we're seeing it in kind of happening in our lives. So let me tell the optimistic story first.
Because Ari gave the negative take.
Yeah,
so I want to hear the optimistic take first.
The optimistic take is that AI ends up increasing the capabilities and productivities of every human.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's like as if everyone is the same. I don't know about you, but if you have a really good assistant, you probably work better.
Yeah.
A good assistant who gives you what you need and helps you out. And so it takes care of the tedious tasks so you can make the big decisions and so forth.
Sure.
So the positive version of it is we have, a nation maybe in a world of like better workers, more empowered, who have this kind of assistant with them and much more productive. So that would be a human augmentation kind of theory, right? And in some ways, the PC was like that. It did replace some people in the 80s and 90s, personal computer, I'm saying. But, generally speaking, made people more capable and also help, entrepreneurs who are going to start a business because you could just get a couple PCs, write something and get going, or having a travel agent, whatever. The pessimistic version, which we've probably heard more about, is a replacement story.
Yeah.
Which is to say, huge swaths of human working becomes unnecessary and replaceable. And you have then large numbers of unemployed people who are angry. And if there's one lesson that is correct, there's one thing Marx was correct about, is that people who are economically unsatisfied tend to get violent, or tend to do things that are bad. And so the bad version of the story is huge numbers of people, hundreds of millions are replaced, feel like they've got nothing and get angry and lead us down a path of destruction and despair.
Sure.
So I kind of favor the first, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, and to your point, I mean, like we said earlier on the onset of the internet, it was that people are going to be unlocked based on this.
Yeah.
And the UBI story, like of universal basic income for all that can't carry a job, that's very anti-internet in so many ways. So let me pivot, because you also talk about platforms in healthcare. Right?
Yes, that's right.
You were in the Obama White House. Post-Obamacare, these platforms grew massively. There was tons of scaling. There was tons of consolidation.
Yes.
I think of like here in Arizona, we have Banner, we have Honor. Those are two big dominant platforms here in the Valley. I think my main question is, as you look at that, some industries, like I'll use Walmart. Walmart's trying to drive prices down through their scale.
Yeah.
But you point out that in healthcare, not all platforms that get big are trying to drive prices down per se.
Right.
Is that because in some cases, like here, they could be dealing in local monopolies and therefore don't have to?
Yes. Among markets that are more and less functional, in my view, and I apologize if anyone here is in healthcare markets are very broken. And I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I think it's hurting us as a country, frankly, when we're spending so much of our gross domestic product on healthcare services. So I think it's a complicated story. So the platform, this is not a book where like platforms are all good or all evil. They can be used for different purposes. What I was talking about, particularly in the book, was the model of acquiring a huge number of practices and then both squeezing the doctors and increasing prices at the same time.
Sure.
I don't know if this book is a full diagnosis of everything in the healthcare industry. I think that'd be another book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to jump ahead?
Yeah. You discussed the emergence of resentment as the third step in the road to serfdom.
Yes.
John Sherman talked about disrupting the social order when he spoke on antitrust. Is this deeply tied to the belief of people based on what they see as opportunity for themselves and businesses not? And just as a reminder to everyone, in post-Civil War, Sherman and the better thinkers, the people that left the Whig Party to oppose slavery in 1850, spent like 20 years. What could ruin this? What could, like slavery and slave ownership, pit people from the right and the left against each other to the point that they'd want to shoot at each other? Welcome to today.
Sure. I go further back, go to the American Revolution, which was, in my view, a revolution centered on economic freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you look at what the colonists were mad about, they were angry about the British Parliament suspending their economic livelihood. And I think it's always been a key part of the American creed to have a sense of opportunity, economic freedom. You can do what you want. I think the rising against monopoly in the 19th century mentioned was a sense that economic freedom was disappearing in an economy that was entirely monopolized. Mm-hmm. I mean, that decade that period was different. In other words, almost every industry just gathered into one and created trust monopolies. So they talked about it, frankly, in that period as a new kind of slavery. I'm not saying monopoly is slavery. That's what people said. Sherman said that. Justice Harlan said that. So it was a big theme of that period.
Yeah. So you talk about the German monopolies and their state function. The German province of Saxony still is an equity holder in Volkswagen today. How problematic is that versus the Taiwanese business model of TSMC, who is coming to Arizona on a large scale?
Yes,
that's a huge building out there.
Is it near
Peoria?
I actually worked on
Northwest.
that. I worked on that earlier on. I think, just to speak generally, and this, I guess, is relevant to our things, that it's risky for the state to get overly involved in deciding who's going to be the winners and losers. Sometimes it can be successful. There are moments when it's been well done. I guess, the counter argument to this is China and its direction of the economy, and some degree Japan. I think this is what I sort of think. I think it's very dynamic. I think the government and the state can have moments, particularly in the beginning, where you have an infant industry and you need to develop it and get it to a certain level. But then at some point you need to let it free and then let it survive in the market. And I think when you look at the long history of industrial policy, it has a great role. In some ways we subsidize and invested the U.S. government in the internet. It's a very good investment, by the way.
Yeah.
Much less than the moon investment, just to fund the internet research. But at some point, backed off. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we need to be thinking. Is sometimes they need credit, or maybe they just need these quite kind of incentives, maybe even some some aid. But then you got to back off. That's what I believe.
I'm so glad he mentioned that, because Star Trek was so popular in 1968. And I often tell people, think of how technology developed since then, and think of how outer space has developed since then, and there's no comparison. We've gone almost nowhere in outer space relative to what's advanced in technology.
Outside is putting a lot more metal in the sky.
I will note that our cell phones are better than their cell phones.
Yeah.
Remember they had those little flip things?
But you can't beam me up.
We didn't get that part.
So let's talk about perfect competition.
Sure.
The guy that's becoming the most fashionable, economic thinker in these days is David Ricardo, who also came up with the laws of comparative advantage, which have been thrown to the wayside, I might add. You add a slide of Galbraith. We're big John Kenneth Galbraith fans. Is one problem that our main idea is, you touched on this earlier a little bit, is like this idea of capitalism or just wealth, right? Just wealth itself versus, China has capitalism.
Yes.
Now, none of you want to live in China, but they have it.
Right.
So is that really not the idea we're going at? I was sitting at a Little League tryout for 3.5 hours, grading 159 and 10-year-old kids for a tryout.
Yes.
And the truth is, all we're sitting there trying to teach our children is the idea of competing and competition.
Yes.
Isn't that really the goal? Because that's what drives innovation and prices.
Yes, I am a big believer, and I think it is the American creed to believe in first economic freedom and second competition. And they go hand in hand, because in a fully monopolized industry or market, you don't really have freedom. You have domination. That goes back to trying to be a telecom guy in the 60s with AT&T ruling everything in partnership with the state. Those are my beliefs. I believe you can have in monopoly, you can have these kind of bursts of productivity, and 1920s is a good example. You can have these moments where you has a sense you've solved all the problem, you have a lot of profit. But in the long term, I think monopoly is a bad bet, particularly state-supported monopoly.
Sure. In
the longer term, because they get big. If everyone's really worked at a really huge corporation, they get dysfunctional after a period of time. And I think the better bet for long-term prosperity, and I'm not talking about 5 years, I'm talking about the long-term, health and fate of nations, is in a competitive economy and some means of keeping it competitive.
Sure.
Yeah.
You talk about the idea of the economic pie. You write, quote, "That's why a policy focused on only growing the pie was also likely, on a systematic basis, to have prevented it from being cut in the first place," unquote. In your view, is the main risk that if the markets don't stop this, redistribution will become a regular discussion like we are seeing in places like California and the
other West Coast?
Yes, I think
West
there's
Coast
some truth to that. I mean, I think that societies with enormous gaps between, that do not have a strong, prosperous upper middle class become quite unstable. I think there's even metrics of this, of how instability, tends to lead to civil problems and revolution. So that's one of the themes of the book. In terms of my own ideology philosophy, I'm a big believer in distributed wealth. I think that wealth is great, it motivates people, but I think we want, as a country, where there's wealth all over the country, not just in one place, and it's spread, broadly, not, I was looking, and I think that is a better bet for long-term prosperity is distributed wealth.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll meet his mother later. She's really good at it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw out.
Maybe I'm scaring you guys of distributed wealth. I'm still saying people should be rich.
Yeah.
I'm just saying we should have like lots of millionaires and 100 millionaires and whatever, as opposed to like, people have 500, a couple of people have 500 billion. I mean, what are you gonna, $500 billion is a lot of money for one person.
Well, I agree, but here's a great part about trust fund babies, and I'm sure I can get an amen in the room here, is that they're gonna spend it anyway. So let me ask a kind of a different way of thinking about it. So Frank Knight, who is famous for the old Chicago school of thought, he said something, and I think in Mar Badet's book, Uncertain Enterprise, I know Chase is in the room here somewhere who recommended this book to me, but he says that there's no such thing as a natural monopoly. And that got my head just spinning. Now, why can he say that? So I'm gonna give you I fully agree with Frank Knight. I'll give you my reason why, and then I wanna kind of ask you if you agree with this. In the infancy of these businesses, we wanted to protect their build and their design, getting them launched, okay? And we refer to that as Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act.
Right.
Okay? Now, it was there to nurture them like they're little infants. Now they're just the biggest gorillas in the room, okay? For better, for worse. I feel like there has to be something to say that that is unnatural. We don't go to banks and say, hey, we're going to protect your liability even if you're doing something dangerous for your customers. We're choosing to do that with the largest companies in the United States. And so that is unnatural for other businesses and industries, as an example. So in the Frank Knight case, I would say Section 230 is unnatural. So are we surprised that we have monopolies with an unnatural term of business?
That's an interesting theory. I hadn't thought fully of Section 230 being the creation of a natural, or the
Wait, but they sustain for a reason.
Yeah,
That's my big idea.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea. I mean, I agree with your point about Section 230. It was done very early on, and I don't know if people know what Section 230 is. Maybe I should explain it.
Please.
So Section 230 basically gives tech platforms an immunity from most state laws like defamation and other forms. They're never the publisher of that which is on their platform. That's the technical version of it. It was designed, it was like a lot of laws that made sense when it was passed and made less sense 20 years later.
Sure.
The porn industry kept Bezos alive at Amazon Web Services in the early days. It was the majority of their business at the beginning because the guys that were good at porn weren't good at technology.
Amazon Web Services made a lot of money.
They don't disclose that,
Still
by the
makes
way.
a lot of
Can't
money.
prove that, but we think.
Frankly, I think a lot of people aren't good at the technology, but their advertising, their sponsor links now makes more than Amazon Web Services. I just want to say that. But on your side point about stick on Section 230, it's one of those things that made a lot of sense at the time, and then like 20 years later, it feels like a subsidy, and has halted development of common law. And honestly, this is a little more technical, but as the platforms have gotten, so in the old days, the main way you would interact with the web internet is you would go there and read stuff. It was still from that old dial-up model where you get on your phone and dial up. And now a lot of stuff comes at you, right? I don't know if your experience. There's one day, I liked Twitter a lot better when it was the stuff I was actually wanting to follow. And at some point, I was like, wait, when did I start following? When did this guy get able to talk to me? You know what I mean? So they start pushing stuff at you.
Yeah.
And as soon as they start pushing stuff at you, I think Section 230 should have stopped applying to it. Overall, I think a lot of laws should have a sunset. That is, the law should, especially for a new technology, it should disappear after 10 or 20 years.
Sure.
Because things always change.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we're watching this where we are providing, and I agree, it is a subsidy. It's a subsidy of reducing liabilities. You're reducing the liabilities of these tech platforms relative to other businesses. So when a European country comes out and says, hey, I'm going to charge you a digital tax.
Yes.
What do? Oh, no, you dare not hurt our great American businesses that we provide subsidy to.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's just like, we have Amber here from Canada, and in like the lumber business, they say, oh, you're getting your timber for too cheap in the softwood lumber dispute, and therefore there's a subsidy there. So we judge other people's subsidy onerously, but we don't introspectively look at our own subsidy that we hand out to these big businesses.
Well, who really honestly looks at their own faults the same way they look at anyone? But
Well, I agree, but this is American exceptionalism.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That was an Amber Alert.
Yeah.
So, Tim, we've had tons of fun. I want to ask for our audience, where can they follow you going forward? You're obviously, teaching at Columbia. Are you active on social media?
I am active on Twitter now and then. I have a mailing list, which if you search for me, you can find me, which I send occasional updates. I write occasionally for New York Times, other publications. So yeah, just look for me and you'll find me. This has been great. Do I have a moment for a closing?
Please, yeah.
Closing remark. No, I think the stake's very big. I'm writing about tech about business, but I am very interested in this project of sustainable prosperity, and I think that the United States project goes through these long cycles where we have unbalanced economy, more balanced economy. I think we've gone towards a less balanced economy. I think we'll be richer if we manage to introduce a little bit more balance for the entire country. So that's basically the message of the book.
Awesome message. I want to give a round of applause to Tim.
Thank you.
Tim, thank you for joining Bill, myself, and the investors of the 2026 Smead Investor Oasis. Your book reminds me of the human element of our society. Things that can't be quantified are still real.
That's true.
Markets do fail to do what we expect at times. We don't know what the future brings. Our listeners should go out and buy a copy of Tim Wu's book, The Age of Extraction, to contemplate where we have come from to where we are now in the scale platforms that we deal with in our everyday lives. If you enjoy this podcast, go to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to A Book with Legs. Give us a review. Tell others about the great authors like Tim Wu that we have the opportunity to understand and study the world with and through. For our tribe, if you have a great book that you'd like to recommend, email podcast@smeadcap.com. That's podcast@smeadcap.com. You can also send your suggestions to us on X. Our handle is @SmeadCap. Thank you for joining us for A Book with Legs podcast. We look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to A Book with Legs, a podcast brought to you by Smead Capital Management. The material provided in this podcast is for informational use only and should not be construed as investment advice. You can learn more about Smead Capital Management and its products at smeadcap.com or by calling your financial advisor.